Welcome to Science Solutions Santa Cruz in Seymour Studios at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. I'm Jonathan Hicken, and on today's episode, a community legend, Gary Griggs. He's a longtime professor at UC Santa Cruz. He was the Institute of Marine Sciences director for many, many years and is one of the forefathers of the Seymour Center itself. And on today's episode, we really dig into the history of Santa Cruz trying to protect its coastline. Things like seawalls and living shorelines and manage retreat. Because Gary has this really cool perspective. He's been on the science and solution side for nearly 6 decades and brings a perspective that I certainly don't. We also unpack this myth of control that we in Santa Cruz and frankly coastal communities everywhere might have when it comes to fortifying our coast against the ocean itself. So it's an absolutely fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Science Solutions Santa Cruz in Seymour Studios at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. And I'm so lucky to have with me a man who really needs no introduction in this town, Gary Griggs. Welcome, my friend. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Happy to be here. This is a very cool studio,
well,
by the way.
Thank you. You know, I want to start off with a story. It was September of 2023, I believe. And my son, Damien, he was like 3 at the time, and we were going for a little bike ride down West Cliff. And we stopped because there was a humpback whale breaching offshore, and he was just captivated by it. And while he was watching the whale, I looked to my left, which was looking east, and I saw the construction zone, because West Cliff had just been, destroyed by maybe 9 months earlier, had been destroyed in that big storm. And then I looked to the west, and there were plumes of smoke coming off Wilder because a prescribed burn was underway. And there's this whale, and it just occurred to me, I was like, the ocean and the coast, this is so deeply relevant to my everyday life. The air I'm breathing, my bike ride to school with my son, it's so deeply embedded for me personally. And you have lived here for 50 years now?
This is my 58th.
58th year. And I have to start with, how is the ocean, how is this coast just part of your daily experience here? Like, what does it mean to you on a personal level?
A little perspective. When I came here in September 1968, I'm sure you probably weren't born yet.
Nope, 1986. I'm turning 40 in May.
Okay. And so for a little perspective, Lyndon Johnson was president. Most of my students say, who was Lyndon Johnson? Ronald Reagan was governor. Gavin Newsom hadn't yet had his first birthday.
My goodness. Okay.
We hadn't had the first Earth Day. And I came from Oregon State with a degree in oceanography. So I've been doing deep ocean work, but we didn't have a ship here. I'd never taught a class before. I'd never given a lecture. And I came to UC Santa Cruz and started in with a oceanography class with 260 students in it. They all had long hair, and the room smelled like patchouli oil, and there was dogs. And I came in with a coat and a tie, and I said, well, this is going to be a different experience. Anyway, I loved it. We didn't have PowerPoint. We didn't have computers. We didn't have social media. So I got into the coastal zone and natural disasters kind of the first 10 years, and it's pretty much been the coast ever since. But I think the combination of my own background and starting out surfing and getting into oceanography, I couldn't have come to a better place at a better time. It was still the first class was at Santa Cruz at the time. So it took off from there. And now it thinks like, we live 2 blocks back from West Cliff. It's like, that's sort of somehow knowing the ocean is there in your backyard and it goes all the way to Japan is a very kind of reassuring feeling. And all my research, my teaching ended up pretty much in the coastal zone.
Yeah, you've talked about sort of the edge, living on the edge. Yeah, and that's I totally resonate with that. There's something humbling about living on the edge of the planet in a way. So when you think back to those early years in Santa Cruz, when you first had just arrived, and can you rewind back and kind of imagine what the coast was like then? And looking back, can you think of anything that you may have assumed would stay the same or assumed would have changed in this time that has or hasn't?
You know, a lot of things, Jonathan, that I think I hadn't thought too much about it because I'd been doing deep sea research.
Right, and that's not something you're seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Certainly where the coast and landforms. I think a couple things. One, we hadn't even had the first Earth Day yet. So most of our, students' activities was demonstrations on the Vietnam War and free speech. It wasn't about climate.
Sure.
Climate change wasn't a thing. So, and the coast, we didn't have a coastal commission. And that was huge. Some of the things that have changed, we now have a much clearer idea of sort of how the ocean works, how climate has changed, which is a big part of, I think, what the Seymour Center is about now.
Yeah.
So my own research and teaching sort of went from geologic hazards and hydrology and tectonics to the coastal zone and coast in crisis. And the idea of the edge, and a colleague and I did a book called The Edge.
Yeah.
And it was an edge for people coming from Asia.
Yeah, sure.
The edge for people coming from New England. And everything stops right here on the West Coast. So the cliffs and the ocean and the beaches are just an integral part of that. Coastal Commission has changed everything. I think the thing I would have never guessed, because when we first came, new faculty say, oh, you want to live up in Westlake, next to the university.
Right, sure.
The lower west side, which is where we are, all the way to lighthouses, that was sort of the low end.
Yeah. By the way, that perception still exists. That has not changed.
Is that right? The property prices have changed. And I think the idea that, these $20,000 houses are now $4 million has changed.
Yeah.
And a lot of other major changes, like something that actually came out of a guy at the fisheries lab here, the idea that we get these periodic changes in climate, what we call Pacific decadal oscillations. So the climate isn't consistent from year to year, but we get periods of decades where we have more storms, more rainfall, more landslides, more coastal damage. And those come in again 10 or 20-year cycles. And so things can be good for a while and we kind of relax. And El Niños, we didn't think too much about El Niños then. And now those are really big events.
Yeah. You have such a cool perspective on all of this because you've been here, you have lived through the when climate change wasn't even a thing, and now here is Seymour Center's dedicated to it. Universities going all in on it. There's a lot of time and energy and money going into it. You've seen it become a thing. So how did that start? Like, was there a transformative moment, you think, whether it was here in Santa Cruz or just nationally, that kicked that all off?
Good question. I think certainly 1970, the first Earth Day, the Santa Barbara oil spill, Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring, a number of events that said, the ocean isn't infinite. It can be affected. For me, a lot of people keep track of time by their kids' birthdays, their anniversaries. I keep track by natural disasters.
Oh my goodness! That sounds like a challenging way to.
So I think we had big floods in 1969, then a 1973 El Nino, and a 1978. The big thing that changed was 1983, which was almost exactly 40 years before the big January 2023 that destroyed Westcliff. A big El Nino, probably the biggest in half a century, and combination of really big waves coming at times of really high tides. So damage up and down the whole California coast, 3,000 houses affected and damaged. So that said, wow, this is a thing. And then we had, the 1997, 98 El Nino and 2014, 15, the 1989 earthquake. So I remember, was it before or after the earthquake? Now we have the pandemic and other things, but those still sort of are timelines for me that remind us that we live in a, pretty fragile place in many ways, as much as we think it's constant. The one constant is change.
Yeah, I really sort of tuned into all this stuff. I've lived in Santa Cruz 13 years, and I took the job at Seymour Center a little over 4 years ago, and it was around the time I took the job where I was really started to tune into the impacts of climate change on Santa Cruz. Because I became a dad and the stakes changed, and right. But what's really interesting, what I'm hearing from you is that there have been these events here for decades, right? To me, it feels, oh my gosh, this is new. This is a big change. This is happening so fast. That's what it feels like to me day to day. But I'm hearing that this isn't new for us.
No.
Yeah.
I did a book a couple years ago called The Natural Disaster, Between Paradise and Peril, The Natural Disaster History of the Monterey Bay region. So all of Monterey Bay, including Santa Cruz, but we looked at floods and fires and earthquakes and landslides and coastal storms. And it turns out there's been as long as people have been here writing it down, like downtown Santa Cruz was flooded repeatedly until they built the levees.
The big levee, yeah.
Capitola's been flooded 15 times, and they keep replacing the buildings. The pier has been destroyed, Santa Cruz Pier. So it's a constant reminder if you look at the history. And they say, if history tells us anything, is that history tells us nothing, because people have what I call a short disaster memory.
Yeah, interesting, fascinating.
Or disaster amnesia, where we want to get back out and rebuild. And this happening after the fires, the same thing. Yeah. So it's easy to just kind of forget, and it makes us sort of resilient as people, and the landscape is somewhat resilient. But now that we've put so many people along the shoreline, there's going to be some more tough times ahead. It's not over.
Yeah, it's our ability as people, as humans, as a community to be resilient and move on and rebuild and keep on going. I mean, that's something I think we can all feel proud of, right? And it's something I think Santa Cruzans take pride in. And I'm sort of, it's occurring to me that there's another side to that coin.
Right.
So how has that played out? I mean, you just mentioned that, well, we started putting more people right at the coast. We pushed through the disaster and we put them right on the coast. What else, you sort of, in the decisions we've made as a community, what have been some of the ones that have been sort of positively resilient, and what are some of the decisions we've made that maybe have put us into deeper risk?
Yeah, I think the more investment we make, the more liability there is for the future. And one of the things I've often said is there's absolutely nothing we can do over the long run to hold back the Pacific Ocean. And it depends on what we call the long run. Anything we do is going to be a Band-Aid. Band-Aids come in different price tags and different lifespans. So we've protected Westcliff now for a while, $30 million. We're rebuilding the end of the pier a little bit. But those are all risky locations. And if we go far enough into the future, and I always ask this, if we melted all the rest of the ice on the planet, how high would sea level rise? People say, I don't know, 4 feet, 5 feet, 216 feet.
Holy moly. Okay.
So we've got about 190 feet sitting in Antarctica, 24 feet of ice, sea level equivalent sitting in Greenland, and continental glaciers, the Alps, the Andes, the Himalayas, only about 2 feet. We don't need to melt all that to be a problem. So, for example, SFO goes underwater with about 1.5 feet above the highest tides.
Is that already happening? Are they already?
Slowly, and they're now in the process of studying a $580 million seawall around the entire airport. But cities around the world are beginning to deal with those things very slowly, and California coastal communities are being asked to deal with that. And we have a problem here because we can build more walls. We've got a lot of those in Santa Cruz and California. Southern California, about 38% of the entire shoreline of San Diego, Orange, Los Angeles, and Ventura counties have already been armored.
38%?
Yeah.
Holy moly. I lived in San Diego for 10 years, and I'm trying to imagine, La Jolla Cove and,
yeah, La Jolla is probably a little more resistant, but think of Oceanside and Solana Beach and so place.
Sure.
So Coastal Commission is sort of going back to their original roots and saying, we're not here to build seawalls. We're here to protect public access and wetlands and habitat. So they're now have sort of put the brakes on any more armor.
Ooh, that poses an interesting tension.
That's big. And I'm working with a lot of property owners who have walls that are failing or who want to build seawalls. And there are definitely impacts of seawalls on the coast. We studied that for 8 years. What happens when you build a wall?
Well, let's go there. What happens when you build a wall?
Well, a couple things. The most important is, so if we go back, this is my column for this weekend of the Sentinel.
Okay.
If we go back 18,000 years ago, we were at the end of an ice age, and we'd moved about 10 million cubic miles of seawater onto the continents as ice sheets and glaciers. So sea level dropped about 400 feet. We know that. That was the edge of the continental shelf. So if we lived in Santa Cruz at that time, which there were Native Americans here 8 or 10,000 years ago, we could have walked offshore 10 miles, been on dry land.
My goodness, even with the deep, the canyon.
That's right.
and
Well,
all
that would have been different. That was a
Okay.
canyon that right off Santa Cruz.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
10
Got it.
miles.
Understood.
Could have had lunch out on the edge if you could walk 10 miles by lunch. So as climate changed and it began to warm, that ice began to slowly melt and sea level expanded in results as that water flowed into the ocean. So the shoreline, we had a beach out there 10 miles offshore. We had cliffs. It migrated to where it is today. So if we didn't have any protective structures here, it would keep migrating. We'd still have a beach in Watsonville. Right. But what we've done, Santa Cruz County, about a third of it is armored. So you think of West Cliff, East Cliff, Capitola, Rio del Mar. So that's one of the bigger impacts. You stop the shoreline from advancing. So gradually the beach will be flooded. So Main Beach, all those, where all those people come in the summer, will be flooded. We call it passive erosion.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest impacts. In some places, the sand coming on the beach is coming out of cliff erosion. Most of it in California comes out of rivers and streams. But in Southern California, streams aren't that big. Much more of it comes out of the cliffs. So if we armor the cliffs, we don't get any more beach sand. It also can cut off public access. You can't get down to the beach. There's definitely visual impacts. By putting a pile of rocks on the beach, you cover over beach. So those are some of the impacts that most people say, what's the matter with seawalls? Well, there's those things that we're aware of if you look closely. But if you live on the cliff, you don't have to look at it, but people on the beach have to look at it.
They're feeling it. So, and I'm hearing that the Coastal Commission is prioritizing access. Meanwhile, communities are wanting to build walls. I mean, that's setting us up for some sort of conflict. What is that?
Exactly.
How is that going to play out?
Well, the Coastal Commission, and you have to go into the original Coastal Act from 76. The language was a little vague in a few places. It says if you have a home or a primary structure on the shoreline before the Coastal Act was written, you can apply for a coastal development permit. And it said an existing structure written in 1976. So for the next 20 or 30 years, people said, well, I have an existing structure, even though it might have been built in 2000.
Sure.
So lawyers are arguing that language.
Sure.
A few years ago, a new executive director said, no, we meant what we said back in 1976. If your house wasn't there before then, we're not going to let you build one.
Yeah, that's the line. Yeah.
There's also another passage that said, if you build anything, you have to allow for at least 100 years of erosion. So if it's eroding on Depot Hill at a foot per year, you should have been back at least 100 feet. Things were built anyway, but now they're adhering to that original. So if you come in for a seawall, you're probably not going to get it. But that's definitely setting up conflict for the zillions of dollars of oceanfront property.
When did it become clear to you that these attempts to sort of hold the line or these Band-Aids weren't really solutions?
I think it was the 1983 winter when seawalls came down, rocks tumbled down, houses were destroyed, oceanfront properties were flooded. That was sort of the coincidence of big waves, high tides, and an elevated sea level from El Nino. And then I began to look at the coast more critically. I've done a fair amount of private consulting for property owners, for people who want to buy a house, for real estate agents. In engineering, and I have a minor in civil engineering, sort of a phrase, all protection ends somewhere. So we cannot build levees or dams to take the 500-year flood. You can't afford to do that. So every seawall, every rock revetment has a lifespan.
Has its limit.
And its limit. So at some point, we're going to come up against that so we can build more walls. The East Coast put sand on the beaches. They've spent billions of dollars. Some beaches have been nourished 40 times. Sand keeps disappearing. Duh.
They're bringing in trucks and just filling the sand?
Actually, often bringing it in from offshore.
Okay.
So that's limited, expensive, short-lived. We can't do that. For very little of that in California. There's a new trend towards living shorelines, nature-based solutions, which sounds lovely.
Yeah.
But if you look at West Cliff, what's a living shoreline on West Cliff?
Yeah, I've wondered the same thing. What
could you plant? There's nothing you could plant. In an estuary lagoon like Elkhorn Slough or San Francisco Bay, we can plant stuff that'll last for a while. But if you raise sea level 5 feet, it's going to go over it. So those have limited short-term impacts or potential. In the long run, it's either going to be managed retreat or unmanaged retreat. And we've seen places in California already, 2 places where Highway 1 has been moved back, one at San Simeon, one on the Sonoma coast. Wonderful writer from the LA Times, Rosanna Shaw, has written this book called California Against the Sea. And she says in there, the reason people don't like managed retreat is they don't like to be managed and they don't want to retreat.
That sounds very American right there.
Yeah. So Coastal Commission a few years ago, each city and county has what's called a local coastal program, like Capitola, Santa Cruz, that says basically how they're going to deal with the shoreline according to the Coastal Act. So how you're going to provide access, how about parking, how about environmental protection. The Coastal Commission originally asked that for every city and county. A few years ago, they said, we want you to update those with sea level rise and managed retreat in mind. So 3 cities said, no, we're not going to do it. One is Imperial Beach, which is the last city on the coast. One is Del Mar, that's right on the sand. The other is Pacifica, where they've already lost apartments and they've moved back mobile homes. So there's this kind of push now. What's going to happen next? Again, nobody wants to do that. And I think the question is, what do all these walls and things buy people?
Yeah. So what is it? I mean, what is it? Time? Is it money? Is it peace of mind? What are we?
I think it's peace of mind. I think it's also the idea that they don't want to lose that oceanfront house. They want to pass it down to their kids and their grandkids. But that was all kind of perceived before we knew that climate was changing and sea level was rising, and you can't hold the ocean back forever. So one of the things I think we need to do in each city or county, so that's Santa Cruz or Capitola, say, what timeline are we shooting for? We can do this for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And, farther out you go, the more uncertainty. So we're now looking at sea level rise. What's it going to be in 2100? 3 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet? 2050, around a foot, we can deal with that. But when you get to 5 or 6 feet, all bets are off.
I mean, in these moments of deep uncertainty, how do communities make a decision like that, right? About what time scale are we talking about? I mean, I have a personal feeling about it, right? And it really has to do with my son. And I'm really focused on, okay, how can Santa Cruz be a place that's been, it can be as good to him as it's been to me. And so that's a 30, 40, 50 year timeline. But how do we make that decision? That seems like an impossible choice.
Well, we're in this mode now where state money through the Ocean Protection Council is being used to fund grants to help communities become resilient. And I'm questioning, what does resilient mean?
Ooh, I have an opinion about that.
Okay.
So I think...
Take it away, John.
Okay. I've thought about this. What does resilience mean? And I think about sort of multiple points of failure, right? If a community has a single point of failure and that thing fails, the community could fall apart. Now, I'm just saying, let's imagine for a second all of our eggs were in the Westcliff basket, right? As far as economically, culturally, whatever, as a city. And as soon as Westcliff goes away, if we relied only on Westcliff for the well-being of our community and that failed, then we're all screwed. But if we have multiple points of failure, then that creates a resilient place. So that's what I want to put on the table.
Well, I think what you're getting at is something that communities need to do is look at the most vulnerable locations. So if you're in Capitola, if you're 41st Avenue is Capitola, that's fine. But if you're downtown Capitola, you're basically at sea level. And you remember what happened? Actually, we had President Biden come out.
Yeah.
The restaurants, the Esplanade was covered with sand. The water went a block inland. Part of the pier collapsed. If you go back in time, that's happened repeatedly. So I would say Capitola is not resilient. I think a critical factor here is insurance. The economic
piece. It always
piece
comes back to insurance.
So this is what's happened with, the fire areas and so forth. And the insurance companies, many people don't know, the insurance companies have reinsurance companies.
What is that? This is
So there's
news to me. What is this?
There's a company called Swiss Re, and they insure the insurance companies. So when we lose 8,000 homes in a fire, insurance companies are paying into this large multinational insurance company that backs them up. But they've got to pay those premiums. So the people that are buying their regular insurance company, Allstate, Farmers, are paying into that.
Okay, so who insures the reinsurer? How many levels deep does this go?
I don't think it goes any deeper than that, but that's why insurance companies are getting out of California. The risks are just too high. So I don't know what's happening in Capitola, those restaurants and things keep being rebuilt. Are they just covering it themselves? Wealthy people can afford to do that. I'm worth $500 million. I suffer $1 million. I'll just rebuild it.
No problem.
And most cities and counties are self-insured. Anyway, so I think the challenge we have is, how do we get the different groups together? And this happened on Westcliff, where they had a lot of public meetings down at the Loud Nelson Center and said, what do we want out here? The money that was given for that project, the title of the proposal that was funded was Living Shorelines, Nature-Based Solutions, and Sand Management. I was working for the consulting team that got that contract, and the first thing I said was, there's no living shorelines on Westcliff. The study went from the river mouth to natural bridges, so mostly Westcliff. The consultants pretty quickly realized, wow, we can't plan anything here. So those concepts of nature-based solutions and living shorelines apply to coral reefs and mangroves, tropical environments. We don't have those here.
What about Main Beach, like right in front of the boardwalk there? I mean, is that suitable for? It
is.
Okay.
In fact, that was one of the few pilot projects. They're going to put some dunes in there.
Okay.
And try to plant them.
Okay, is that happening? I knew that was
it's on the plan.
Okay, all right.
And what I said, because they had to do something that was in line with the title of the proposal, and I told her what's going to happen is in the winter months, really big winters, the waves come all the way up to that seawall and erode the beach. They're going to be gone.
It's like a 3-foot seawall, right?
Yeah.
At the edge of the boardwalk.
That's where people are all summer long. You can put a little fence around, but people can be walking over those dunes. So I understand they had to do something. The other place is just at the west end of Lighthouse Field. There's a section that hasn't been repaired. And they said, okay, we'll do relocation there. We'll move the road inland. Everything else has been repaired, but there's a kind of a bright red fencing there.
Yeah.
So they're going to let it continue to erode. So that may be a managed retreat part of it. But in general, if you look from the river mouth to natural bridges, Main Beach is okay. It's held in place by the jetty and by San Lorenzo Point. Pretty wide beach. It'll erode in the winter months, but it's from Cowles all the way to natural bridges. And we just repaired the worst parts. But I think what's going to happen, there's been some discussion about Lighthouse Point. And if you let that go, it's going to change surfing. This is what my column is about.
Sure.
It's not going to change surfing. Waves don't have anything to do with the way they break with what's on the cliff. They break 300 feet offshore. It has to do with the waves, where they're coming from, how high, their wavelength, and the bottom. It doesn't depend on what the cliff is. It could be rocks or concrete or sandstone. It doesn't matter.
Explain that a little bit. How is the ocean floor playing a role in what the wave looks like?
So waves come into our coast from Gulf Alaska, from Hawaii, from local wind swell. At any one time, there might be several different wave fronts coming in. And when they come in together, they can constructively interfere where crests come in and we get sets for a while. Where they break depends on the wave height and the wave length, distance between crests, and how that interacts with the bottom. So generally, the ratio between wave height and water depth is about 1.3. So a 10-foot wave will break in 13 feet of water.
Okay. Yep.
So if you look at where the surfers are taking off, there's a cliff there, but the break has nothing to do with the cliff.
I thought that there was something about them wrapping around.
Well, they do, but that's the seafloor offshore.
Okay.
Wave refraction, there is rock out there. We have seal rock, so the waves do wrap around.
Okay.
And that's why it's good for surfing.
But it's not the immediate cliff, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, got it. Okay, understood.
Same thing happened when they were building the Pleasure Point wall. I was involved in that study, and the surfers said, well, this is going to screw up Pleasure Point, this iconic surf break. So we put in a tieback wall. We made it concrete. It looks kind of like rock.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And there's some access paths they put down. But if you look at surfers, are 500 feet offshore.
Right.
The waves are breaking there because of the water depth and the waves coming in. So it's the same thing for indicators or the slot or, first peak. It doesn't depend on what if Lighthouse Point collapses or not. It's the offshore topography.
If you haven't visited the Seymour Marine Discovery Center at UC Santa Cruz in a while, or ever, you really should come visit us. We are right on the bluffs of the beautiful Monterey Bay, with an aquarium full of local species and a bunch of hands-on science exhibits that help you understand what's happening in our ocean and along our coast. We are connecting the incredible research happening at UC Santa Cruz with real-world solutions for our coastal community. We don't want science to just sit on a shelf. We want it to shape decisions, inspire kids, and help our community feel equipped to act. So if you care about the future of our ocean and our coastal community, or you just want to experience a place that makes you feel a little more connected to it, come visit us at the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. Science Solutions, Santa Cruz. I'm torn because on one hand, it seems like a rallying call, right? It seems like this is important culturally, and if we can rally the community and mobilize the community to support XYZ solution, you could argue that's a good thing. But what I'm hearing is that there's some false pretense in these arguments, whether intentionally or not. There's some assumptions we're making. And so how do you rectify that? Like, we need solutions, and people are getting excited about this thing, even if scientifically it's not totally on base.
Well, that's a good point. And I what I'm saying in my article that'll come out this weekend is there may be other reasons to protect Lighthouse Point, but they don't have to do with the way the waves are going to break and the, quote, surfability. So there are these two caves, one's out in front of it, one's coming in from the side. They're going to come together and it's going to collapse someday. Sections have been collapsing. They actually put a concrete wall in front of the one in front of the lighthouse, and that collapsed over time. So there used to be a big arch where guys climbed down the rocks to get in the water, and we show that in the book on Santa Cruz Coast Then and Now. That collapsed. There was an arch on the other side. There used to be two seal rocks. Westcliff is changing all the time, and I think, as you say, you want this to be here for your son. It'll be here. It'll just be a little different.
Yeah.
And I think if you really want to go, we can't control nature as much as we try, and I think that has to do with seawalls and revetment and so forth. We want it to stay exactly like it was when we were kids. So Cowles hasn't changed that much. You see these old photos from the 20s and the 30s. Rittenhouse, who was,
sure.
Some of these old photos, there's still waves at Cowles. They may not be exactly the same, but the next storm will change the sandy bottom. People have been surfing, at the lane for not quite a century, but nearly. Waves are going to be a little different. It's like you go skiing. The slope isn't always the same. So I think we have to adjust to change and realize it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same yesterday as it was the day before, but there's still going to be waves breaking. There's still going to be surfing. It's not going to disappear. So Surfriders did that study that came out a little while ago on the economic
Surfonomics, and it was some number of $1 million that they estimate
almost $200 million a year in value. And I reviewed that, and I know the guys that did it, and I said I have a few questions about it because they got into. I admire them. It was really nicely done report, and the economics, that's always tough. But they were trying to determine if sea level rises 1 foot, how will that affect the surfability? And they came up with they're going to lose 30% of their surfability. And I said, really? And then if it rises 2 feet, it's going to be 60%. Well, what's surfability? Is it the way the waves break? And I said, one of the challenges is, until 2 years ago, if we want to know what sea level rise rate was here, we used a tide gauge in Monterey, which is 30 miles one way, or San Francisco, which is 75 miles the other way. And there's a lot of geology between there. There's evidence from the 1989 earthquake that the coastline actually came up here.
It lifted during the earthquake.
So now we have a tide gauge on the pier.
Okay.
It's been there 2.5 years. For all we know, the land may be rising faster than sea level rise is, which happens in other places in the planet. It happens in Alaska, happens in Scandinavia, where it was loaded with ice. Thousands of feet of ice depressed the land. When that melted, it's slowly rebounding, just like you get up from your bed or your couch. So sea level is rising globally, but in Alaska, the land is rising faster. So there's actually sea level is dropping in Alaska.
And that could be
The case
here. But we just haven't been measuring
Monitoring
it
it long enough.
Yeah. So we don't know.
So I think the detailed calculations they did on surfability, we had a nice call about it. I said, I think you can be very precise, but not very accurate.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
I think that's an open question. And I think some of the local guys have said recently, people I respect, Bob Pearson, well, I've been coming out here for every day for, 50 years. And the point is changing. Exactly. It's not changing the surfing though, even though people probably be angry at me for it, but show me where you take off on the waves and how that's affected by the cliff.
Right.
Different issue.
Honestly, I'm kind of like, I'm fast forwarding 30, 40 years and being like, the guy who's like, oh, it's different. Back in my day, it was different. But what I'm hearing you say is, yeah, it will be different.
Definitely.
But it will still be surfable and surfing.
Might even be better.
It could even be better, right? We really don't know that.
A new break.
So you're a professor, you're a consultant, you're an author. One of the things we try to unpack in this show is how science leads to and connects to solution making, especially at the local level. You've been seeing this, you're active in it. It's, even as recently as this Living Shorelines Nature-Based Solutions Plan, you're active in it. So walk us through just how you practice that in your day-to-day. What are the important things that you're doing to connect science to solutions, or in your career, how did you start to bridge those things?
So I've always had this kind of applied interest. And if I was, a math major, it'd probably be different.
And to be clear, by applied interest, you don't mean just like, I don't want to do science so that it sits on a shelf and nobody reads it. I want to do science that people can use, right?
Yeah,
That's the
solving practical issues.
Yeah.
And because my background is in oceanography, geology, and civil engineering, that comes together in the coastal zone.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've done a lot of over the years, in addition to teaching, hopefully you impart some of that to the students and they go on in their careers. It also is in my writing, so most of my books have been written so the public can understand them. And then I started these Sentinel articles 18 years ago.
Yeah, our ocean backyard. I mean, it's a staple in this town.
Every other Sunday. So, but what I've tried to do, Jonathan, is what I call educating rather than advocating. So hopefully by reading things about climate change and offshore drilling, people can see, oh, there's going to be an impact, there's an effect to this, rather than I have a bully pulpit to tell people what to do. And
Sure.
I also see that in consulting. I've worked with the Coastal Commission. I was on the California Ocean Sciences Trust for 10 years and just chaired it the last year and a half and just stepped down from that, and the Ocean Protection Council Science Advisory Team, and I've been on the last 3 sea level rise studies for the state. So I think those are ways in which that information comes to the public, whether they pick it up or not. And I've certainly worked with the county and in consulting. So I see that as a way for me to use what I know and have public. And then these books I've written over the years, which just keep coming out. Nobody reads books.
You're prolific. No.
Prolific.
I think we carry 3 or 4 of yours in our gift shop right now. Yeah.
I'll just say, if you want to make money, don't write books. That's not why I do it.
So what does it look like when you're at the table with policymakers or politicians or decision makers? What's your role in those conversations?
Again, I would say education
Yeah.
rather than advocacy.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the things I've done that very few, I think, academic people do, every time we publish a paper, and the last one we did is on what's a resilient coastal community.
Okay. Yeah. Trying to answer that question.
So we sent out questionnaires to about 55 people that work in the coastal zone, staff at the Coastal Commission, staff at the county, staff at USGS, coastal engineers, coastal geologists, attorneys, property owners, and said, we asked them 3 questions. What is a resilient coastal community? Got a lot of different answers.
I bet.
How long would it have to be resilient to be considered a resilient community?
Oof.
And are there any examples?
And?
A wide range of answers. For example, when it came to what's a resilient coastal community, say, well, how about the Netherlands.
As a comparison, the Netherlands, a country.
Because everybody knows it's underwater. Half the country is underwater. But so we put that together. We had 55 responses, and we published that called What's a Resilient Coastal Community in a journal called Journal of Coastal Research. And what I do, so if you publish an article in anthropology or physics, it goes into a journal, or you go to a meeting and give a talk and nobody in the public understands it. I have a list of about 30 or 40 people like John Laird, or the director of the Coastal Commission, or the Coastal Commission staff, people, local government, that I send those articles to, and most of them are really happy to see it because they don't connect directly with scientists. So I do that with everything I publish because I think it has community value, and people that wouldn't read the Journal of Coastal Research find out, oh, thanks, Gary. I mean, John and I communicate, John Laird, pretty regularly, and he's always appreciative of stuff that he wouldn't see in the Assembly or the Senate. So that's one of the things I do. But I also try to be, and I think that's some of our other questions, how do you communicate science here to the most number of people in ways they can understand?
Yeah.
Through a language, and we just talked about this paper on Talk Like a Human.
Yeah, Talk Like a Human, yeah. I mean, it's something we're exploring. Part of this show is an exploration, and it's an attempt to do exactly that.
Which is great.
For our community, is bring in the scientists who are understanding why these things are happening, and decision makers and policy advocates, and bring everybody. I mean, there's so many people, and so many brilliant people who have their eyes on these issues right now. Though when I talk to folks walking in our doors at the Seymour Center, there's a disconnect of like, oh, I didn't know that we being the collective we, the Santa Cruz we, that we were studying this and that we were acting on it, and how do I get involved? And so this is an open question about how to do this communication correctly, but there's no doubt that your column has made a big impact. And I think one of the most powerful things about it is the consistency, that you have been publishing that every 2 weeks for 18 years, right? It's become something that people can expect, right? Yeah.
Hopefully understand.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, you send them to me from time to time, and I'm honored to be included on that list.
I never know who reads them, but it doesn't matter. And I'll get emails maybe every second or third article. I'll get one, and sometimes it'll hit some people stronger, and I'll get 3 or 4 emails, and they're all positive. People are glad to read it. There's an interesting book, you may have seen it, by a guy named Randy Olson. It's called "Don't Be Such a Scientist."
Ha! That sounds like something we all need to learn.
He was here for a postdoc for a while. Then he went to a marine biology academic position. He realized he wasn't making any progress, so he went to USC Film School, and he's done some films. But he also has this kind of communication workshop with agencies, and he has something called "What You Learned from Film School." He says most scientists go to a meeting and give a talk, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. Thank you. Sit down. And he has something from movies and film called ABT, which is and, but, therefore.
Awesome storytelling technique.
So it's about telling stories.
Yeah.
And everything's fine, but climate's getting warmer and ice sheets melting. Therefore, we got to do something about it. Not, oh yeah, here's all the numbers. So, he talks about you can hit people in the head, you can hit them in the heart, you can hit them in the gut. It's not data, and that's what that little story about Talk Like a Human gets into. They don't care about parts per million CO2 or 2.3 degrees Celsius. Tell them, world's getting really hot and we're suffering. You know, how do you do that? So I try.
Yeah. On a personal level, I actually can relate to this disconnect between the science and making a difference, so to speak. Early in my career, I thought I was going to go down the academic path, and I had the chance to do some research on undocumented migration from Mexico to the U.S. and sort of the impacts of the border wall on migration decisions that were happening in rural communities in Mexico. It was an incredible experience. It's an issue that's still near and dear to my heart. But I had the chance to publish and to actually take those findings to a congressional convening to sort of, to see if we could influence border policy. And I walked away feeling totally deflated by it. And it was sort of the thing that sort of said, academics are not for me. The academy, so to speak, it wasn't going to be for me. And it was just this disillusion with we spend all this time and effort to produce the science, but then it takes a while to publish, and then it takes more time to get in front of Congress, and then it takes time for them to think about it. By the time any decision could even happen, the things we found are no longer relevant, or the world has changed. And so, I can relate to this of like, don't be such a scientist. And in large part, that's why I do what I do now, is to be able to take that science and move more quickly with it.
Right.
So actually, a little plug for a new exhibit coming to Seymour Center in May. It's called Seymour HQ, and we're out to solve this exact problem of getting the science that's happening at UCSC and in the region to our community more quickly. So whether that's just for families to understand how they can get involved or what this means for their life, but also to get it out to our nonprofit partners and our public agency partners so that they can, start making some decisions with it.
Great goal, great objective.
Yeah.
And I think from the beginning, the idea of the Seymour Center wasn't just a tiny Monterey Bay aquarium, even though everybody's fascinated with the aquarium, but this is the hub where the research the university does can be presented to the public in understandable ways.
Yeah.
So I think you've kind of just catapulted that forward even further and looked at larger national, global issues to say, how do we communicate this? What are the big issues we can talk about? So good on you, buddy.
Well, thank you. But, and it's the coolest job in the world because I get to just amplify and celebrate all the stuff that you and the scientists and community partners are doing, right? It's just like you all have these incredible stories that need telling. And so I consider myself the luckiest guy to have this
You're
job.
the storyteller.
I get to sit down and talk with folks like you and Eric Palkovacs and Katie Thompson and others. So it's a real delight. So as we start to wrap this up, I like to think about what role does Santa Cruz play in, whether they're California-wide discussions or national discussions. So if Santa Cruz were sort of a case study for future scientists, what do you think our history over the last 50, 60 years would teach these future decision makers?
I think one simple message is the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And whether it's wildlife or temperature or ocean or whatever, I think what's also important is we punch way outside of our weight class.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Both California and Santa Cruz. So people listen to what happens in California. I mean, look at Gavin Newsom. He goes to represent the U.S. at conferences because Trump won't go. Say all the things you want, but he's having an impact.
He's showing up. Yeah.
Stuff starts in California and then moves across the country, I think. It doesn't usually start in Kansas or Nebraska or Ohio or South Dakota. So I think anything we do here, and the university is an example. We started as this, sometimes it's been called Oxbridge, with this new university that Clark Kerr and Dean McHenry came up with. Let's get away from the multi-university. And many of the children of university faculty in other places wanted to come to Santa Cruz. And some of those first students were pretty crazy, wild, smart people that tried some new things. And now, for me, kind of surprising, they're now in positions of power and authority. Some have retired. I mean, there's Kathy Sullivan as one example. They're now in their mid to late 70s, my first students. And I look around because I keep in touch with a fair number of them and to see what kinds of, accomplishments they've made. And I'll hear back from people say, wow, that class I took from you was really important in getting me started. And I don't know when it was. A couple of years ago, I went up to talk to, what's a campus radio station, KZSC?
Yeah.
And it was at night, and I went in and talked to, it was Bruce Bratton or one of the people.
Sure.
And as I came in, the woman at the desk, older woman, says, I took your oceanography class. And I said, oh, cool. The thing I remember most of all? I said, I have no idea. So to explain how pressure in the ocean increases with depth, I brought in a styrofoam coffee cup, and we were sampling on 12,000 feet of water. We sent a bunch of these down tied to the sampler, and it comes out about the size of a little thimble you'd use for sewing. She said, I still remember that thing you brought to class. So it's what are the props, the messages? Like I tell people now, or ask people, do you know how fast sea level's rising today over the last decade? We're measuring this from satellites. And people say, I don't know, a foot per year, an inch per year? It's 4 millimeters, which is about the thickness of 2 quarters. So what we've seen the last couple of winters here wasn't, you look at those waves coming on West Cliff, it wasn't from sea level rise. It's from big waves coming at times of really high tides that overwashed West Cliff. So we need to keep in mind kind of short-term and long-term. So what are our stories we can tell? And I think a lot of those come out of Santa Cruz because we still have really creative students. We've got some great faculty, and communication is key, how we do that. It's not just in the lecture hall, not just in our classrooms, but it's things like you're doing, Jonathan. I'm always happy to be here.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, there's this the tension of how there's this pull to want to tell an extreme story, right? Because, you know, extreme stories capture interest. And there's the risk of over risking
Right.
the situation.
Just wear everybody out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something, you know, here at Seymour Center, I'm trying to always lead all of our stories with solutions. So what's the solution that we're working on? And what's the problem that we're actually trying to solve?
Good question.
The thinking being that, hey, it right sizes the solution conversation from one that's, hey, here what we need to do at the global level. And it also is, you know, one step further than, hey, you need to use another metal straw. But here's, as a community, here are some solutions that we're advancing. And we're finding that it changes the tone of the conversation to always start
Right.
with the solution. But I think something we need to be careful of is not getting sucked into maybe
Gloom and doom.
Yeah, the doom and gloom, and also the sort of the tendency to overstate or get too excited or too scared of like sea level rise and accidentally communicating that it's happening much faster than it is. So this is a risk and something that we're figuring out on the fly. So, you know, I want your feedback on it, right? How are we doing on it along the way?
You're doing well.
Yeah.
Two things I try to keep in mind. One I call sober optimism.
Yeah.
And the other is aggressive incrementalism.
Okay. Break those down, each of those.
You know, we need to be optimistic. And as a teacher, as a parent, as a grandparent, you know, we have to have hope. We always have to have hope, or we're throwing the towel. The aggressive incrementalism, even though there may be little steps, every class that comes through here, a light goes on. Maybe it's only 2 of them or 10 of them, but all those little steps, and you know, we have a big, complicated world. Things don't change overnight. But I can see in the 58 years I've been here, big changes. And I see those 18,000 students I've had, or my 80 graduate students. Each of this has a career, and they're touching lives, and they're educators or professors. So I just get up every morning feeling great with a list of things to do that keeps me going. And that's why I haven't retired.
Well, that alone gives me hope, knowing that, you know, 58, 60 years into this, you still got the same drive and the same energy and the same hope. So, you know, you were the former director of the Institute of Marine Sciences for a long time. You built Seymour Center. So I quite literally have you to thank for my job.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan.
No, thank you. Thank you, Gary. It's always, you know,
you're improving it every day, which I'm really happy to see.
Well, that means a lot to me. Thanks for coming on and having this conversation with me. And
wonderful.
That does it for Science Solutions Santa Cruz with Gary Griggs, and we'll see you next time.